Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The mother of Alexei Navalny has travelled to the prison where the Russian opposition leader died to ask for the release of his body. Russian forces claim they captured the key eastern city of Avdiivka after Ukrainian troops withdrew. And 12 arrests have been made during a pro-Palestinian march in central London. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the Barrister and Futurist, Andrew Eborn, and the Sunday Mirror's assistant editor, Laura Armstrong. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Where is my son's body, Putin? That's the question in the Sunday People from the mother of arch-Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, who's died in prison. She believes the Russians are hiding his body to prevent the truth coming out about how he died. The Sunday Times, meanwhile, claims that officers from the Russian security services visited Mr. Navalny in prison just 2 days before his death. After Ukraine pulled its troops out of the city of Avdiivka in the face of advancing Russian forces, The Observer says President Zelensky is now pleading for more arms to repel Putin's invasion. The Sunday Telegraph has an attack by Labour leader Kier Starmer on former US President Donald Trump for what he calls his recent bad faith criticism of NATO countries. The Mail leads with an investigation which it says reveals that eco-activists have been plotting to occupy the homes of MPs in the run-up to the next general election. Laura's paper, the Sunday Mirror, has been speaking to royal insiders who say despite hopes of a reconciliation after the King's cancer diagnosis, Prince William has decided there's no way back for his estranged brother Harry. Same lead story for the Sunday Express. Likewise, The Sun on Sunday, which also says that Harry was stopped from going to Sandringham with the King when he came to the UK to visit him. And the Daily Star Sunday claims victory in its campaign to free Baloo the bear from a Romanian zoo, where he's reportedly been forced to drink alcohol and is poked with sticks to amuse visitors. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by the Barrister and Futurist, Andrew Eborn, and the Sunday Mirror's assistant editor, Laura Armstrong. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Let's start with that bold headline on the front page of the Sunday People. Where is my son's body, Putin? This is Alexei Navalny's mother, who's tried to reclaim the body, and it hasn't been released to her, and she believes that this is being done to really cloud over how he's died.
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? Lyudmila, I think is her name, 69 years old. She turned up at this Arctic prison to find her, hoping to find her son's body, to try and get to the bottom of it. And she was told he wasn't there. And they travelled, apparently they made the journey of 1,200 miles together with the lawyer to try and get to the bottom of this. And we're getting told all sorts of different stories about what might have happened, whether it was a heart attack or whether it's other bits and pieces. But everybody's sort of pointing the finger at Putin on this sort of side. And the more that the information is withheld, the more suspicious people are getting.
And Laura, we turn to the Sunday Times, and there are actually claims from campaigners that FSB personnel allegedly disconnected and dismantled security cameras and listening devices at the prison when they visited Navalny, and this was a couple of days before his death.
Well, as Andrew says, it's sort of suspicious circumstance upon suspicious circumstance, isn't it? The more you read, the more murky it gets. This was reported earlier today. This piece also touches on the lack of clarity surrounding his death. Very quickly, it was announced that this was down to a blood clot or thrombosis. Then the definition changed to sudden death syndrome. Meanwhile, Putin's allies are saying that they won't release the body until they've completed their investigation. So I think this just adds more kind of murky circumstance that makes people question and indeed some people to firmly point the finger at who's responsible for this.
And Andrew, meanwhile, those in Russia trying to pay their respects are being arrested when they're laying flowers or simply gathering around photos of him. So a crackdown in that respect.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously the biggest opponent of Putin is no longer here, and what's happening is these horrendous scenes, and some of the papers have picked this up, of people being carried out and so on and so forth. It's an appalling time, and I think that the longer it goes on without that sort of clarity as to what's happened to the body, what are the circumstances and so on and so forth, the more that people are going to be pointing the finger. And Biden came out straight away to say, look, this is Putin with blood on his hands. And I think we need to get to the bottom of it. It is absolutely appalling. The conditions in which he was held in this Arctic prison, I think it was, what, minus 28 degrees. He was given terrible rations. But the pictures, the last known pictures of him when he came before a court, I think, fairly recently, he was defiant and smiling and so on and so forth, as he always had been.
I think pictures like this are quite a powerful reminder of what kind of ruler Putin is. There were some details earlier in the week that I read that were quite sinister in terms of people trying to pay their respects, and they were having their pictures taken, obviously, to be followed up later, which is certainly very sinister.
Do you think that we're still going to see people out on the streets in Russia, bearing in mind there have been more than, I think, 300 arrests?
I think it's very difficult. People will get scared for their own life. They no longer have a leader from that point of view. And Putin's people have basically turned around. They've been on in the news all the time, sort of saying, well, he, of course, it's nothing to do with him, is what they're saying. And so what we need to do is to get that clarity. But certainly the idea of democracy is an interesting one in Russia.
Meanwhile, we turn to The Observer with Zelensky pleading for more arms and really saying that the West needs to step up.
Yes, absolutely. Keeping Ukraine in the artificial deficit of weapons, particularly in deficit of artillery and long-range capabilities, allows Putin to adapt to the current intensity of the war, is what Zelensky's saying. And it's difficult because that he's going to, if people don't continue to arm him or sort of stuff, he will lose. And I think that's the sort of reality. And each time he's making this plea to try and keep it front and centre. As he says, dictators don't go on vacation. That's his sort of call for, please, we need more money.
Yes, and he's referring to the US Congress's decision to call a 2-week recess instead of voting on the $60 billion military aid package.
It feels like a key moment in terms of the conflict. It's sort of, although we've had Kamala Harris today saying she believes there's a consensus amongst the Congress about support for Ukraine, it seems like this is the moment for everyone to decide where we go from here. And obviously we've had the takeover of this city, we've had the tragic death of Navalny, and these are all kind of bringing to the fore the question of what happens if Putin is allowed to win this war.
And Andrew, do you think that the death of Alexei Navalny is a turning point in terms of America's commitment to Ukraine and Zelensky?
It was interesting. As I say, Biden came out straight away to point the finger at Putin. And I think from that point of view, it'll be interesting to see where he goes next. I mean, he's just come out now. It's obviously an election year. In election years, they want these battles to be finished because it doesn't look good for them. So they're going to start getting tough. You know, I mean, he himself has tried to appeal to all sorts of people from the electorate. He's just come onto TikTok, for example, on that sort of basis to appeal to Generation Z. I think he wants to look like the tough leader with tough language to try and bring it to a conclusion.
But I'm thinking in terms of Congress military aid package, do you think that the death of Navalny will change hearts and minds?
I think certainly hearts and minds are going to look at this and say, hang about, we've got to ramp it up. I think from that point of view, I think that certainly, if they were hoping it would go away as a result of Tucker Carlson interview or whatever, I think the reality is it's focused everybody's mind to say, we've got to deal with this.
I think it's quite generous to call it an interview. Let's have a look at the Mirror front page. The royals back on the front page is there. Harry, we know, came back to visit his father on his really making it public, his cancer diagnosis. Many of them reporting that Harry was hoping to step up and perhaps even step into some royal duties.
Yes.
But his brother, his older brother, saying there's no way back, reportedly.
I think it's very sad, isn't it? And all the papers have picked up on the same story. I mean, the Mirror, brilliant front page, no way back for Harry. There he is trying to reach out. He flew over especially to see his father. Only managed to get 30 minutes, but I think that's as much about the King's schedule as anything else. But you have to bear in mind there are humans and personalities at the end of this story. And it's a son trying to reconcile with his father. It's been a very troubling time. It's been played out in public. The relationship between the two brothers has not been great. But I think it's a sad headline to say there's no way back for Harry. And clearly they've been briefed because all the papers have picked this up on that basis.
Which in itself is quite telling
Yes.
in terms of their position. I mean, I agree with you completely. I think it is very sad. It's always sad to read something like this. But equally, can you blame him? I mean, the sort of repeated attacks over a sustained period of time played out that publicly did at times feel very cruel. And I think that there'll be a lot of people reading this thinking, well, we can't really blame him for not accepting that hand that punched me last year. I think as well, if you were to apply a really cynical point of view to it, you would look at where things are with Harry and Meghan's financial situation. There's not been very much said about Netflix and all their works that are in the production there. You know, has that sort of crystallised their minds in terms of how they cope financially in the future?
Well, they've just changed the things for the brand. It's now Sussex.com as opposed to SussexRoyal.com and so on and so forth. So they're looking at that. I do think this is, on a personality side, I always want to try and encourage families to reunite. And I think George War, not war, on that sort of basis. So I find it a very sad headline across a number of papers. And I do hope there is a way back and they can be reconciled.
The Sunday Express has a double-page spread.
Yes.
Their headline, William has enough on his plate and will not allow Harry's return to any royal role. I mean, this story, I guess, is sourced from insiders, and we have to, well, I presume that this is the case.
Yes.
But we have no way of knowing what state their relationship is in.
Well, there are two chances, slim and none, is the quote, isn't it?
It's worth noting, though, that they do say at the end of that spread that that's not to say the situation is permanent. They're brothers. At some point they could reconcile. So they have added in that caveat. I mean, I think most people reading this will think that that's perfectly fair, that at some point, hopefully, they will reconcile, but it might take a little bit more than a nice interview given in the US talking about the importance of family being fixed by illness.
And sometimes it's the media being used in the nicest possible way to peddle a particular narrative, to say, hang about, you've been a naughty boy, we're going to expose you in the press, let's try and work out a sensible way forward. Clearly these papers have been briefed. The Insider, which happens to tell all of the newspapers, it's working on that sort of premise. But I think, as I say, it's very sad if there isn't a return, and I do hope they can find a way forward.
And Laura, do we know from any of these articles what the King actually thinks?
Well, I think the phrase used was warm to describe their meeting, that the time they had together was warm. The Sun have reported in their coverage that actually his meeting was cut short and he wanted to come to Sandringham but was not allowed to, which would suggest perhaps a slight frostiness, but warm is the word that's been used to describe their meeting. I mean, which I'm sure that people will understand, you know, as a father, particularly one that's going through a difficult time. I'm sure it's something that he would like to see.
Andrew, let's turn to the Express, or staying with the Express, actually,
yes.
and the story about Sir Kier Starmer.
Oh, isn't that lovely? Talking about dads, and Kier has famously spoken about how he was distanced from his father during his lifetime. What he's now discovered in a very sort of tearful moment is that his father actually kept a little scrapbook of all his successes whilst he was Director of Public Prosecution. And he realised that actually his father loved him after all. And he sort of rather wished that he found out too late that his dad was proud of him, and he wished that he'd known in his lifetime. If ever there was a moment to turn around to the one you're no longer speaking to and make up, this is the time to do it. And Kier's leading the way, saying he regrets that he was ostracised from his father.
Absolutely, Laura. His father passed in 2018. He
did, yes. This is a follow to a long series of interviews that appeared in the Times, in which he talked about his background and all of the sort of the difficult circumstances he faced when he was growing up, and it also featured interviews with his sister and his wife. And I think it's obviously very much a concerted attempt to sort of show voters who he is as we approach an election.
OK. Laura and Andrew, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, eco-activists plotting to occupy the homes of MPs in the run-up to the next general election. That's on the front of the Mail on Sunday. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Barrister and Futurist Andrew Eborn and the Sunday Mirror's assistant editor, Laura Armstrong. Just very quickly, because people always ask, for the record, Futurist?
Yes, basically I make people lots of money by predicting the future. So I look at things like AI and how that's going to interview and intervene everybody's life and change the way that we live and breathe and everything.
There you go, now you know. You can stop asking me on X. Right, we're starting with the Mail on Sunday. Just up oil activists plotting a sinister nationwide blitz to occupy MPs' homes ahead of the general election, we read. This is from a Sunday Mail on Sunday investigation.
It's awful, isn't it? They're going to ramp it up. They're saying that we're ready to look a bit loony, is what they're claiming, and I think they already look a bit loony. But this is the idea, and it's a horrendous story. They're going to occupy, this is what they're threatening to do, occupy MPs' homes ahead of the general election. And what they want to try and do is get as much media coverage as possible, having disrupted major sporting events, having ruined artworks and so on and so forth. But the general public are not behind them on this. If they want to get real people supporting their causes, these actions are not going to do it, are they?
No, they're not. And I think that the other point about this is obviously it's a horrendous experience for the people who they do this to, if they do manage successfully. But also, if you're an MP at this point and you're reading this story, you're going to be sitting there sort of wondering every time you put your key in the lock, you're going to be thinking, is this the day? And we're living in an age where there's a lot of violent threats on social media. There's actual violent threats that are targeted towards MPs. We obviously remember Joe Cox. Yeah. It's just a really horrible thing to happen, and it does feel chilling. It does feel sinister.
It's awful. MPs are stepping down because they're scared. I mean, we had Mike Freer just talking about that very recently. He's saying he's scared for his life and that of his family, and as a result of it, these people are no longer standing in politics. It is unacceptable on any level that people should fear for their lives.
And Tom Tugendhat writing to police to say that they need to step up their protection of MPs because they are genuinely worried about their safety. Let's move to The Observer and this story regarding, well, really an appraisal of the working from home culture. Is it good? Does it work for people? Do people work harder or not?
I think it depends on the job, and your job you probably couldn't do from home as well as you do it here, which is always a joy. But they're saying people are more healthy, they feel less stressed, have lower blood pressure, and this is a report from the UK Health Security Agency and King College London. And there's a couple of things. Working from home, they always said you're either going to be a hunk, a chunk or a drunk. I think they worked on that basis. So you've got to look at that sort of stuff. But they're saying for some jobs it's really good and that they should basically look at this a bit further.
And they're saying that people are actually less likely to take time off sick, tend to work longer hours and to work evenings and weekends. So seemingly people work harder when they work from home. I think there is truth in that. Obviously, people, if they have a long commute, perhaps they spend that time working instead. But I think, for me, the issue with working from home is, A, the social aspect that people really do miss out on, and particularly for young people, because there's an awful lot of people who go into a career at the very start and they learn by watching other people. How are they able to do that if everybody's working from home? And it feels like it will halt people's progress. Yeah, that's a very good point. We're just going to finish off with the Sunday Telegraph. Andrew, you take us into this story about a hospital that's allowed surgery by unregistered consultants.
Unregistered consultants. So it's a worrying story at the moment, and I think this is the sort of headline, saying that basically within this particular hospital, which is down in Brighton, there are a number of unregistered consultants. What is important, however, and it's sort of buried in the story, is that they basically, the trust under investigation are disputing the figure. So this is an initial investigation into what actually might be happening. But they say there's at least 105 cases of medical negligence and allegations of cover-up at this particular hospital, which are being probed. So I think until there's been a judgment, I think we have to be very careful about rushing in to condemn people. The evidence on both sides, it needs to be balanced. They're denying the allegations, they're denying the figures, and I think we need to wait until the full investigation has happened.
And Laura, do we know what they mean by unregistered consultants? What does that actually mean?
I think that it means that there's a very rigorous series of tests and multiple specialist exams that you need in order to achieve that level. It appears to be suggesting this is people who haven't reached this point yet. And there is also a quote in there from a trust spokesman who says appointing experienced doctors not on the specialist register is common practice in the NHS. That's then disputed by a source who says this is not acceptable on any level. So I think, you know, I mean, they appear to be suggesting that this is something that helps. They appear to be suggesting this is something that happens elsewhere, which isn't going to do much for people's faith in the NHS.
And as you say, we need to wait for any conclusions of the investigation. Laura and Andrew, thank you both.
Thank you.
We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. In the meantime, let's take a look at the weather for you.